Good afternoon. My name is Ashley Meadows, and I'm the lead programmer here at Planet Word, a museum dedicated to inspiring and renewing a love of words and language. We are absolutely thrilled to have you all here and to host our neighbors, National Museum of Women in the Arts, for this fabulous panel. Thank you all for coming.
Good to see your faces. I'm Milani Douglas, Director of Public Programs at the National Museum of Women in the Arts. It is a pleasure to be here. We haven't had an event in a minute, okay, but we're making this one happen. Thank you guys so much for coming out. Today, I am so excited about this program. We are doing a program called Work on the Walls. You know, a part of my DC spirit wanted to call it Work the Walls, but that's another story. But it's called Work on the Walls, and we're looking at women muralists and graffiti artists and seeing what women are doing in the public space. So this program, how many people have been to a Women Art and Social Change program before? Raise your hands. Okay, Susan, your hand should definitely be raised. Our director is here. Hi, Susan, how are you? Good. Okay, so Women, Art, and Social Change, we focus on what's happening at the intersection of art and social change, just as it says. And it's an amazing program. I want to highlight our sponsors. We have Denise Littlefield-Sobel, the Davis Durrett Family Fund, and also the Ravada Foundation, and also the Logan family and the Susan and Jim Swartz Public Programs Foundation. We do get some support from the DC Commission of the Arts, who's also supported by the National Endowment for the Arts. And I could tell you so many things about these amazing artists. I'm going to tell you their names first. Michelle Angela Ortiz, she's out of Philadelphia. I'm letting their work, they're going to tell you about their work, so I'm not going to do the bio thing. We have work to see. So I'm going to get right to it. MISS CHELOVE, she's here in Washington, D.C., but has stories from around the world as well. And also Nekisha Durrett, amazing graphic artist working in the public space. They're about to show you their work. Michelle is going to come up first. You guys ready? Okay, all right, good.
That's okay. For one unit. First, thank you for inviting us and inviting me to be with all of you. This was my first train trip since the pandemic. So it's really exciting. I'm really excited to be with all of you in person and sharing a little bit of my work. So, and to be in presence of such amazing other artists as well. We started out in sharing a little bit about who we are and what we do. And I thought I would share first an installation that I had done at the Philadelphia Museum of Art dedicated to my mother. And the piece is called Arrival and Belonging. So a little bit about my people. My people are from El Caribe, land workers, healers, and bolero singers. My people are from La Costa, the Magdalena River, and brown women that cook, laugh, and love hard. My people are hovered over tins of fire, keeping the oldest outdoor market alive with their immigrant dreams. My people are the ones with calloused hands and warm hearts healing and surviving the trauma by sharing their stories and revealing their light. So as a child of immigrants, a woman of color, a mother, and a product of two people that experienced extreme poverty that led them to immigrate to this country, our lived experiences, our ancestral lineage, our stories are the deep roots to my work that I've been focusing on for the past over 20 years. Stories are powerful, especially within the context that they're told and represented, and I see myself not just as a muralist, a visual artist, a filmmaker, but also as a storyteller, a visual storyteller. So my creative process is really activated in through facilitating dialogues, identifying themes, translating those themes to visual representations, and doing this with integrity and respect with the community. This is Olga, who lives in the Cully neighborhood in Portland, Oregon, standing in front of her portrait that was painted in one of the largest affordable housing buildings in the state of Oregon. So now it's fully housed with mostly immigrant, African, Central American, and Mexican immigrant families. So from murals to large-scale public art installations, I create community engagement methods that take into account the issues around responsibility, accountability, and ethics, which I feel is a larger conversation that's much needed when we think about social art and social practice and community arts. I feel that public art is really a tool to amplify the voices and stories of the community. So telling our stories gives communities visibility and value. This was a group of folks that I've worked with as a cultural envoy through the United States Embassy, and I worked directly with communities that were affected or have been really navigating through their mental illness. And there was a ton of gray walls in Buenos Aires, in Barracas in Buenos Aires, Argentina. And all of the people that you see there placed their hands and actually we worked together in creating this 300-foot mural in less than 2 weeks. Mm-hmm. Yes, I do that too sometimes when I look at it. So telling our stories also preserves our languages and cultures and identities. This was a mural that was created also through an exchange that I did in Mexico. I worked directly with indigenous Mexican communities that migrated from Querétaro in Mexico to Mexico City. This community are the Otomi community. And so utilizing their traditional patterns, we created the story of their migration. This building that you see there was a 20-year fight to get the families to be able to leave the streets in their makeshift homes, which are casones, and to finally be in apartment buildings. And so what was really beautiful about doing this mural was that the community members actually were moving in as we were painting the mural. I believe that telling our stories through public art is also a tool for advocacy and change. So this are just some snapshots of an installation that I did in front of the ICE building in Philadelphia, which is one of the most aggressive ICE buildings in the United States. We had over 30 families and that helped me with the installation of the 90-foot words of Anna, who was a mother who was detained at the Berks County Residential Center, which is the first family prison that it has incarcerated children and their parents that are seeking asylum at the border. And when we think about the border issues, people usually think Texas, California. This is in the state of Pennsylvania, 40 minutes away from the Liberty Bell and all these other symbols of freedom and liberty. And so the exit, we did this installation at the exit point where loved ones are then moved and transferred to continue the process of deportation. And ICE agents were looking down on us as all of the family members and I worked together in presenting these words in a space that carries so much fear for the families. This was a moment of being fearless and coming together. This was done in 2015, so also before Black Lives Matter street murals. And so it was just really beautiful to see in 2020 the work that was being done there. I'm going to move a little bit quicker. So Eres Mi Todo, this was also done in City Hall in Philadelphia, which is actually the compass marks the center point of the city of Philadelphia. And here I have the image of Maria, who was affected by deportation, and her son is sitting by the words of his father, who had sent handwritten letters during the time that he was detained. Okay, sorry. And I'll wrap up with quickly with the next slides, is that, other than murals, it's really thinking about public space and engaging people within that public space and utilizing a grid method, utilizing color, utilizing those same techniques that I use for my murals, for other forms of engaging people through public art. So this is 1,600 handmade flowers that were made by a number of mothers that were still detained at that family prison, as well as advocates. And this was placed at the City Hall, as well at the gates of City Hall in Philadelphia, and has traveled even to Washington through the Kennedy Center. Mm-hmm. I think I can end there because we're moving on. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I'm just going to move forward. There we go. So, yeah, thank you.
Wow. So great to see you guys. My name is Cita Sadeli. My artist name is Miss CHELOVE. I've been practicing these mural arts for about 12 years now, mainly through the Murals D.C. Program, but also a really great local nonprofit called Words, Beats, and Life, which uses hip-hop education and advocacy to support young people. Everything, DJing, MC skills, poetry, breaking. Anyway, really cool organization. You should check them out. This is a recent work that I created for School Within School. It's a Reggio Emilia program in Northeast DC, and it uses really the ethnicities of the student population and the traditional textiles to create this image of joy and exuberance. With my practice, it's important for me to create these types of images that center around joy, pride, and explore some history from each space that I work in. I feel a responsibility, as you folks probably do, given these big spaces, to try to reflect what's happened here, who's visiting, why are they here, issues like that. Social justice. It's really an opportunity for you to speak about whatever you think is appropriate, but it stays up for so long. It definitely is a responsibility. I'm going to go into a little bit of my background and kind of like my origin story, what inspires me. As a first-generation American woman of color, my roots lie halfway around the world in Java, Indonesia. I'm the youngest of 4 kids, my parent, a Javanese single mother who came to the U.S. as a Fulbright scholar in 1965. You can see her there at university, actually, in Bloomington, Indiana. Although we were totally disconnected from our large family and culture back in Java, our mother's lifelong involvement with the Indonesian embassy here in DuPont Circle allowed us powerful connection to our culture. We grew up in this beautiful, huge, old mansion. If you guys have ever been there, it's amazing. You should go. While she performed in the gamelan troupe, which is our orchestra. Really beautiful. So we grew up there. We grew up in D.C. and still had that connection, which is really rare. We wouldn't have had that if we didn't live in D.C. and have these embassies, right, with all their wonderful programming. So with my practice, I honor the life and legacy of my mother, of the immigrant story, which centers around hard work, the disconnection from home, culture, family, language, support, the power and fortitude my mother exuded raising her 4 kids alone in a new country left a deep impression on me. As well as if you know my work, my styles are pretty varied, but I'm really inspired by the fine, ornate details, and that gets me into trouble with timelines sometimes. But it's interesting the way this DNA comes through, right? Even if you've never been there, I didn't go back home till I was 25, but these things were expressing, and it's just interesting once you do go home to see, oh, that's why I do these things, you know? So in my teens, preteens, I found DC punk rock, like in the 80s, which is really renowned for, a strong scene, bands like the Bad Brains, Minor Threat, really on this cutting edge of the sound, but also having a consciousness and social responsibility. It would not be uncommon to go to a show that was also a benefit for a women's shelter, folks were vegetarians back then. That was revolutionary. Like you couldn't, you're like, you can't eat anywhere. But yeah, just growing up in that culture, the DIY, do-it-yourself ethos, it was about doing it yourself and taking control of your own personal power, regardless of the money that you had or didn't have. It was about, protesting, anti-nuclear, anti-war protests that were happening, rock against racism, rock against Reagan in the nuclear era. I don't know if any of you folks were around for that, but combining these things, right? The music, the culture, the passion, the activism, we're in DC, so those all folded together really well. Another big influence was graffiti art. I found that in an anti-drug pamphlet in my high school, and then I just fell in love with the art form. I did not know what it was, but I was in love with it. The topography, the line work, the scale, the flow, and the energy of the art form really intrigued me. And I went off to the races, studying it as much as I could, taking pilgrimages to, Harlem's Wall of Fame and New York City, and just practicing. So the interesting thing about graffiti is it gave me many of the skills that I use today for creating large scale works, understanding the flow and energy of a line, as I said, color theory, what works at distance viewing, what works on a train going really fast and you could just like read it really quickly, how to plan and paint quickly is illegal. The power of creating an image that can be read instantly, right? Like when you're looking at something, how successful is it as a graphic, really? This is my first publicly commissioned mural in Adams Morgan in 2011, and it's really well, you'll see it in the next couple of slides, but it was designed with the kids in the elementary school across the street in mind. There's a playground there, so I thought, okay, who's seeing this, and what would they want to see? And I just thought it would be cool if you're seeing something every day for it not to become boring. So how can I like hide all these little things in this piece? So for the adults, there's things like 12-inch dance records. Like I always try to fold in like underground music and culture into my work because that's where I come from. But, Chuck Brown, Wind Me Up Chuck, you got the guitar there, the Godfather of Go-Go, you've got the New Balance shoes, which in the 90s and aughts, I guess, and even still today are like DC's unofficial shoe. Our wonderful Abisha Ethiopian community, WPFW, which was on Champlain Street. The adults will see these things. The kids will just see like, wow, there's all this interesting stuff happening. It's colorful. And somewhere in this, you might see every day I see something new, that message. So this was an interesting challenge for me as my first piece. And it remains one of my faves. But if you're ever in the Adams Morgan neighborhood, check it out. It's at Champlain and Kalorama. And what's interesting is, so this is the wall previous, which is interesting to see. This is the playground across the street. So you kind of get that vantage point. This is us in production, getting set up, using the lift for the first time, which is always interesting. But seeing the work in progress is cool. But one thing that I never fathomed, like, the lives that these pieces have after you leave. They're like seeds, and like they become really important to people. There's a little park there with a bench. It's actually called Champarama Park because it's the intersection of those two streets. Anyway, but like people hang out there all the time. Our neighbor across the street just told us recently that he went there and like cried over a breakup back in the day. He's like, you did that? Oh my God. It gave me so much, peace or whatever. But anyway, as you can see, these pieces take on lives of their own and they're so beloved by people. These are just from IG. People tag me and they're just amazing. Seeing how people can interact with the work. It's like the biggest joy I have after just completing this long job in the hot sun with the mosquitoes or whatever, is to be like, okay, now what's going to happen next? I'm really eager to see that. These are just some pieces around the city. So Gardens of the Four Directions, really interesting piece. I chose it to speak about today because of, you'll see why, but, it is an interesting experience. The first day of production was March 20th, and then March 11th, Mayor Bowser shut down the city because of the pandemic, right? So I saw the whole city change from this vantage point. I saw people dragging their office chairs across the park, like looking all bewildered, like, okay, I guess I'll work from home for the next, it's going to be 3 years, guys. Who knew? I mean, we didn't know we were washing our groceries. I mean, you remember. But anyway, about the piece, this is Hotel Zena, and it's formerly, well, we won't talk about the formerly, but if you're from DC, you know about the formerly. So this houses over 100 pieces of art celebrating women. If you ever get the chance, go inside. There's some great pieces. There's the Ruth Bader Ginsburg piece that's comprised of 20,000 tampons that are dipped in paint, and then it's kind of like a light bright, kind of like a dot thing. Anyway. But the ask here was to create these women warriors. And originally the client was asking for something a lot more aggressive. Like, we want the spears, like we want the weapons out. And I'm just like, we don't have any public art in our circles. Like and I don't really want to approach this that way. So I created them like more as guardians, and guardians of Pachamama, Mother Earth. It's inspired by not only the power women hold to birth, nurture, and protect, but also the environmental work of indigenous communities around the world. One great fact is, although indigenous folks comprise less than 5% of the world's population, they protect 80% of the Earth's biodiversity in the forests, deserts, grasslands, and marine environments in which they've lived for centuries. So indigenous folks are really literally saving the earth. This circle to me looks like a medicine wheel or sacred hoop, which has been used in the indigenous American communities for healing practices. So I wanted to transform this into a place of healing and peace. And what's interesting is after that, here's some close-up images to show the scale. This is the city emptying out. I mean, it was so busy and then it was totally dead. But the interesting thing about this being a place of peace is later on that year in May, George Floyd was murdered and everything, the country and the world in general was thrown into this chaos. DC became a place of protest, and so many things were happening that year. Protests and actions were coming up and down 14th Street where this mural is, and this mural became a place of like a gathering place and a place where people felt safe, especially people of color. That then sparked all of a lot of the storefronts downtown being covered with plywood, and all of these spaces becoming canvases for artists. Anyone, grandmothers, groups of young children, they were making art, they were expressing their pain. Yeah, it was just a really powerful time coming out of that space, coming out of this, the pandemic, and the 1-2 punch of the pandemic, and then George Floyd and police brutality and everything that was happening. Okay, I'll end on this. I'm sorry, I'm running over a little bit. This is Reseeded, a forest floor flow, and it's a tongue twister. But it's also a piece that I made for the Women's Museum. It's the first in their series of 3 for the Lookout series that activated the building while the remodeling of the museum was happening. And it's based on really my culture and my separation from my culture. To be reseeded means to be planted again, to start anew. I was moved by 3 central themes: the act of being physically replanted through migration or displacement, the power that our precious environment holds to regenerate, and personal reinvention as we evolve through life's chapters and experience post-traumatic growth. And I'll end with this. This theme of regeneration is especially present after enduring the COVID pandemic. If the adage is true, that only through struggle do we really grow, the coming expansion will be something for the record books. And this is a little bit of the production. 3 panels went vertically down. The crew was amazing. I mean, you can see the scale there. They were just monkeying along those bars and like doing it all. So, yeah. Oh. Sorry.
That was incredible. So it was weird to hear Melanie introduce me as a graphic artist, because what you're going to see is not graphic. There are graphic elements, but last night I happened to meet the first person who gave me a shot at public art, and that was a developer named Jair Lynch, and you may have Jair, so you've probably heard his name around. And I had an opportunity to thank him for giving me, trusting me and giving me that opportunity. And it's one of those things where it's kind of like going home and seeing your artwork from, when you were in the 5th grade on your parents' refrigerator. Like, it's just really kind of embarrassing. So whenever I go to Safeway on Georgia Avenue, I look up and I see this faded like 12-foot tall banner that I made like in 2008. But that's sort of where my public art journey began. So I felt like just because that happened last night, it was important to bring that up here. So now I'm currently working on a project that has been ongoing for about 2.5 years. It's for a public park in Arlington, Virginia. And I was commissioned to create a site-specific public work. That was all they said. I didn't know a lot about Arlington. I'm not sure how many Virginia folks are here, but sometimes for folks in D.C., it's like going to Virginia is kind of like almost going to another planet. So there wasn't a lot that I knew actually about Arlington, Virginia. So I did a lot of research, which is where my projects usually begin, with a ton of research. I'm very interested in bringing forward histories that are lesser known for one reason or another. And typically Black history. So I was very curious because I always feel like when I'm in Arlington, like, where are the Black folks? Like, where do they live? You know? So I was very curious about, the history of Arlington as it related to Black folks. So in my research, I discovered that there was this thriving Black community, self-sustaining community. And you can actually see it. I wish this had a little pointer because I point at it. But in the top photo there, you can see, like a hamlet with little modest homes. And in the background, you see this huge building looming. So in 1941, the War Department, we were about to engage in World War II. And the War Department looked out across the river. DC was overcrowded at the time, so there wasn't space to build this massive building, this huge footprint in Washington D.C. So they looked across the river and they said, "Hey, there's nothing over there. There's just woods and a couple of little shacks." So those don't look like little shacks, do they? Right? So if I were to zoom into this picture, one of the things that you might notice is that in 1941, the roads are not paved. You might even still see outhouses, and you might see wells. And what you wouldn't see is that there's no running water and there's no electricity in 1941. Every place else around Arlington was developed except this little hamlet. So the interesting thing is, like, you might look at this picture and say, well, the Pentagon is still there, Queen City is still there. Why did folks lose their homes? So when they got that knock on the door saying that they had to leave, they gave them 3 weeks, by the way, to leave. They had to build the parking lots, the acres of parking lots, highways, the sewage system. They had to build all these things to support the Pentagon. So when I'm doing this research, so there were 903 individuals who lived in Queen City when it was demolished. And to me, what needed to happen was that there needed to be a space to hold these people, to bring them back together. You interview anyone who's still alive. There are a few people who are still alive. You interview any of them, they say that what they lost was their sense of community. So I needed to create something, a container, a vessel to hold all of these people. And so this is that structure. So this is where we are with construction right now. So to represent each one of those 903 individuals, I commissioned 17 Black ceramicists from around the country, as far away as San Francisco, and as close by as Arlington, Virginia, and Washington, D.C., to build these 903 vessels by hand. So all of these vessels are bespoke, individual, and represent all of these very singular individuals. And as you see, there's a sea of blues and browns and greens. And that's because the spec that I gave the artists, the ceramicists, was to create a vessel that was the shape and color of a drop of water, the thing that they did not have access to. So we're about halfway through installing all of the vessels inside. So this is only about 450 of the vessels. So in a couple of weeks, we'll be finished. This is William Volin. He is a living former resident of Queen City. He's 92 years old. He is just full of pride about Queen City and is so excited about this project. And in speaking with him was when I realized why it is that I do the work. And one of the things that I think both of you mentioned is how an artwork really isn't complete. It really doesn't come alive until others interact with it. And so I was able to share images of the sculpture with William. And he just immediately got it. And he just said, this is like bringing all of those people back together. Some of them who have passed away, many of whom have passed away. But it's a way to bring them together and to, his words, to be a beacon light to show the world how horrible eminent domain is. So that's all.
That was really good. That was rich. And it's so good to see everyone's presentation. One thing I love the most about muralist public work is that there's a relationship that the community has with the artists that you get to see them grow over time. Sometimes in a studio practice, you may not, right? And then you get to see their growth and their evolution. I want to ask you all, how did your own individual practice, once you started to work as a muralist or starting to work in that public space, from Safeway all the way to Queen City, from those very beginning points that you all have, how did you see yourself grow in that public space? What was something that stood out for you all?
I can, for me, it really begins with my own family, right? I started out with the installation piece, which was like multi-screen and light boxes of my mother's image, because I come from a family that has really rich stories, but do not always see the value of their stories and preserving their stories. And I felt that once I went to school for fine arts. I live in a city that has over 3,000 murals. So it's muralism was a way that I experienced art and connected with art because I wasn't a gallery goer or my family didn't go to museums. It was literally like how fruit was displayed or how we would decorate our home or the public spaces that we were in really influenced like how I perceived art, like something that we live and breathe versus something we just go to a place to look at. And so when I finished and I got my bachelor's in fine arts, it was in 1999 is when I started doing mosaics and started doing work in public space. And I felt very much connected to the communities that I was working with, that a lot of the people that I came in contact with have very similar stories, like my grandmother and my mother and my father. And so, and even myself as a child of immigrants. And so I felt seen in those spaces. And I also felt I guess the best word to it is, which might not be the perfect word, but like satisfied in working with communities and feeling that my work was much more than something beautiful or transforming a space, but like to have, and that's why it's so beautiful to see this photo of the community member that you were speaking to, because to feel seen and valued is so incredibly important. And I felt that early on, I couldn't define it the way that I'm saying it now, but my gravitation to public art and working in community was understanding the importance of feeling seen and valued, and that our history is preserved. And so that was my initial kind of like connection to that.
Yes, a little bit in there for me too. I can remember when it was sort of a conscious decision. I remember initially it was just kind of logistically, because I had a background working in museums. I worked in museums for about a decade, and my work started to become greatly informed by the work that I was making in museums. So I was doing a lot of graphic work, a lot of graphic production, so large-scale wide-scale printing and mounting photo murals and things like that. And so my work was so inspired by that, and so I started making my works kind of larger and larger and larger and larger. And then there was a public art consultant, I think, who was working at Cultural D.C., who said, you know, you might want to start taking your work outside because it's getting kind of big. And so that's sort of, it was kind of like logistics. And then I just started to see just how your work just becomes, your reach becomes so expansive when you're outside of the white cube. You know, just people just going to get their groceries or dropping their kids off at school or whatever, like they get to have these like surprise encounters with your work. And it's just, it's really incredible. And there's more I could say, but I'm going to pass it on to you.
I think I went into my origin story a little bit, you know, just even having started in graffiti, you're right. Like, I don't mean to say this in a overly aggressive way, but you're taking space, you know, and you're claiming it for your own, and there's a power in that. And whether it's sanctioned or not, I mean, there's so many spaces in this world where there's unsanctioned art that is beautiful and amazing and huge, and it just happens. I mean, think about the folks in Brazil that they climb like 25, you know, stories high on the outside of balconies just to tag or write messages, and it's just this. So I think maybe in reverse, I don't know how I'm going to not work big, because I tried, like most of my practice is mural work, and I've tried to make smaller works, and it's really difficult now because who's going to see this? Is it going to be like locked away in someone's apartment somewhere? And which is fine, but like there's something really enticing about being a part of the fabric of humanity. 24 hours a day. It's never closed. It's never, you know, and especially people can see you creating the work. Women love that. I mean, as you folks have been out there, that's one thing I enjoy a lot, you know, seeing women drive like, yeah, you know, and it's like, yeah, you know, we're taking up space, you know, and that's radical.
It is. My daughter in the city and with our friends, it's one thing to try to teach them to take up space. It's another thing to take them to spaces where women are taking up space, you know, so that's just, I love what you're saying about being a part of like the public fabric and the connections that are made there. When you all are going into the community, each one of you spoke about research, right? And seems like there's this very kind of internal research that happens almost with the archives, but then there's also this communal research. Could you guys talk about your process with research?
Just a terrible student in general, like the one that just kind of did enough to, you know, to kind of get by. So it really started with a Google search. And then that Google search kind of, it piques the curiosity. And then obviously you have to go deeper. You have to confirm sources. And so it's, I think this is better. Yeah. And so it's also as having community partners going into the Arlington Historical Society, going into the Arlington, the Arlington Community Research Center that's in their public library.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think and to speak specifically to the installations I did around family detention, I was under my project called Familias Separadas, which was done in 3 different phases. And I think one of the main things, especially when dealing with or addressing or amplifying the existing voices of communities that are dealing with a specific social issue, is connecting with the people who are doing the work already on the ground, honoring the work that's already been done, and connecting with them first and figuring out, like, I'm not just an artist doing an installation and something nice, right? Like, how can this be of service to you? How can this advocate? How can this tell a story in a different way that hasn't been done, let's say, through protest or lobbying, or even campaigns? And I think through my work, and specifically, like, for 7 months, I visited the mothers at the Berks prison, which is finally shut down, I can happily say, as of the end of January. And so it was really important that when I went to go in to speak with the mothers, is checking my own privilege, right? I think people assume, oh, well, you're Latina, you speak Spanish, and you're a child of immigrants. I'm not undocumented. I'm not in the same position as the families that are in there. I have the freedom, which has been taken away from these families, to enter and exit this facility, right? And handling my conversations and my interactions with community with a lot of sensitivity and care and mindfulness, that when I entered and the mothers were sharing their stories with me, that I always left them with a prompt, an idea, a breathing exercise, something that was hopeful, something that helped them concentrate on the freedom that they were fighting for, and also even see in the midst of this system that was failed to see them as human beings. Like, how do you hold on to your light for yourself and for your children in this situation? And so I felt that it was very important to, when having these conversations with community members, my responsibility at that moment was also to leave the mothers in a place of hope and positivity. And that is something that comes with, again, it's like that muscle as an artist and working with communities. But it's much more than just the end result, the installation. It's what we learn through the journey. And so I've learned how to strategize better through organizers. I've learned how to shut up and listen, although I'm talking a lot right now. But also just going like, okay, great. Yes, you're interested in this. Let me direct you to the people who are doing this work 24/7 and on the ground. So I think that's some of the work that I've been able to learn from other people.
A lot of things are coming up as you're saying this. I mean, stepping away from the research arm slightly, like when you're dealing with a lot of the work that I do isn't grant funded, so the budgets are a lot smaller. So you don't have the budget, unfortunately, to do the things you would like to do in terms of, the ground research and just like setting up before you even start designing. But one interesting kind of flip to that is, like, you think about mutual aid network and these like groups of people that form to help care for each other when our system is failing. And a lot of the calls I'll think about, and sadly having to do with police brutalities, folks, someone was killed in this place and we need a memorial banner. Can we find an artist to fill this need and support these grassroots organizations that are doing the work and all the social justice stuff that we want to expressed, you then begin to feel like a tool, in a good way, a tool of service to create something to support a grassroots organization's needs. And I think that's a great part of what we do. It's a great aspect to our work that we can, again, as Michelle was saying, folding in those organizations and seeing what the needs are in this space. How can we serve?
To one of the ceramicists that I worked with is a local artist named Martha Jackson Jarvis. And one of the great things that she said to me when I went to her studio to pick up her vessels was that she said, you know, Nekisha, this is a really good project. And she said, I can tell it's a good project by the way that it multiplies out. Like there's this multiplicity built into the project where like it's just amazing what can happen when you decenter yourself as the artist and you allow others to kind of to speak through you. And you're like, there are so many, I feel like people, individuals, ancestors who are kind of speaking through me for this work to happen. And by them speaking through me, that is channeling out. And then it's repeating out again and repeating out again. So, you know, working with the ceramicists from around the country, I had, you know, this one ceramicist tell me that, you know, he's in Detroit and he was at his local compost station and the people at the compost station were talking about Queen City. That is something that if I were working alone, could not happen.
Yeah.
You know?
I think it's so important to speak about that network and how decentering yourself, what that can do to a project as ways opens up, but also how that network always comes back to take care of you, like with the mutual aid. I've heard all of you all speak about the network that takes care of you. And so can you all talk about building that network and how it has showed up in your progress as an artist?
You know, when I met with J.R. Lynch last night and, you know, I had the opportunity to to thank him, you know, it really was about that. Like I wanted to let him know that I was thanking him for his trust in me. Like just so much, like I, you know, went from being, you know, doing the graphic work to, you know, making this massive monument, because along the way there were all these people who put this trust in what I was doing. And they were all people that were right here in DC that just kind of trusted me every step of the way. And so, and because of their trust, it just kind of, it elevated my confidence in what I was able to take on. So I think that that's one way that community has like taken care of me. Like really.
There's so many different instances. So, yeah. But it's just thinking about like different moments. I mean, I'm working on a project right now in my community, which is the 9th Street Market. It's or for folks who are visiting Philly, it's like, oh, it's the Italian market or the Mexican market. It's a market of immigrants and migrants. And so this is the place where I was born and raised and still continue to live. And I have found that, you know, it's interesting because it's a place that I feel like deeply rooted. And then at times, like I don't belong, right? Because everyone is like, you know, well, I've been there for 40 years. And there's other people who've been like, well, I've been here for 80 and my family's been here for 100 years. And I find it really interesting, even with some of the conflict that we've dealt with in 2020, in June of 2020, there was the removal of many monuments, including one of Frank Rizzo, which was a mayor, the first Italian-American mayor to become mayor in Philadelphia, who actually came from South Philly, where I'm from. And then they tore down the statue and they erased the mural. And he was controversial because of the violence specifically that he incited and inflicted on Black communities, Black and brown communities, but predominantly Black communities, and was a person who was instrumental in the MOVE bombing, which Philadelphia bombed their residents in I'm going to get the date wrong, but in the 1970s. And so he was seen as a hero. This was a mural. It was seen as this actually, I remember being 17 and seeing this mural being painted in my community and knowing that this person did not represent us, represent me, or represent others other than the Italian families that felt pride, right? And I was taught in this school system that this was a hero, right? And it wasn't until I was an adult that I realized that he wasn't. And so, so this project that I'm working on now is how I see it of folks who are kind of in these different perspectives and have their own points of views around this history, and meeting people where they are. I think that's the other part. Like, so even with the Italian families that I'm engaging with, the produce vendors that I've been working with, finding the way that I'm always surprised in how my community takes care of me is where they are giving their time and their energy and being honest and meeting me in a very complicated space and situation, right? And also understanding that I'm building on the 25 years of labor, both emotional and physical labor my mom put into that market because she worked in the market for 25 years. So I think that I'm in it right now, and it's not easy. And I think that I am proven wrong sometimes of expectations or how far I think I can have people meet me, or vice versa. And I think like I'm so in it right now with my community that it's just being really grateful when things click or something makes connection or people can build empathy through those conversations. And I see it as, whether it's through the public artwork or the conversations, like as those moments of healing.
It's a lot of work, these big projects. So the one thing that I think about is really understanding the framework of supporting yourself and what that means. And we heard this conversation a lot when, even before the summer of racial justice, the fight for racial justice, and how tired everyone was around, fighting and doing all the work that they're doing tirelessly. How do you care for yourself? I think as women, we're so holistic. And we notice everything. And, as Christine, my friend, says, men, they go out and they kill the beast and they drag it home and they, and then it's done. Like the work's done. But women, I feel like it takes so much to do this work. And I'm still trying to figure out, if we do have the questions to other artists, my question to you folks was going to be about that. And how do you deal with this expenditure of energy? And, if you have children, it's just expanded elder parents, community, family that you have to take care of. It's a lot, I had an answer for your question, but I have more questions.
You have to take care of the art that takes care of the artist, and that's usually the family, the home, the community. So that's a great question. Like, how do you take care of yourself? How do you care for other people around you? And how does that pull into your practice? That's a fair question.
Well, I can say that when I was visiting the mothers at Berks who had children the age of my son, it was very hard to be there. But I also felt that it was a 45-minute drive. So at least I had 45 minutes from Philadelphia to Berks County to get myself together so that I can be present for the mothers, right? They didn't have time for my tears or, sadness. I had to be on and for them, right? And be present for them. And then once I left the prison facility, I had 45 minutes to decompress before I saw my child, right? And my family. And I think one thing is just, I was incredibly inspired by the mothers. They kept on saying, well, you know, they did this beautiful artwork and it was so inspiring. I said, no. You are inspiring, right? The fact that even I did a 30-minute documentary of Las Madres de Berks. That's what the documentary is called. And then there's a moment in the film after the mothers were released that I captured one of the mothers singing a song to her child, still with probation, a probation bracelet on her ankle. And this was the song that she would sing to her child for him to feel safe and calm. And those were just beautiful, precious moments that I hold on to and have an immense gratitude and appreciation of being with my child, having the agency as a parent to parent him, you know. And that's what I learned, just immense gratitude. But also it is about how do you have that balance of being present. And I can honestly say after so I got a Art for Justice grant fund to do phase 3 of Familias Separadas, which was right in the middle of the pandemic. And I was burnt out. So it was like 2019 is when I had like finished phase 2. And so what I had to do, and similar to what you were saying, Nekisha, is like I had to look towards other artists that can help support this work. So I created a curriculum and had a playwright, had teaching artists in different spaces that could actually put the emotional energy into this work because I knew that I was spent, right? And I think with the pandemic and just having that awareness of like, okay, how can I still do this work and get the support that I need? It's really critical because you're right. If we are not taking care of ourselves and our well-being, we cannot be of service to anyone around us.
I think having a team, you mentioned, you know, having these people that you trust.
Yes.
Working with you. It took me a while to get to that place, one where I was willing to let go of a little bit of control. Also financially, it takes your budgets take a big hit when you have to pay other people to do the work for you. But it really is, I think, a way that I am able to take care of myself. I had years into the government, so I'm used to like getting up early and like shutting everything down at like 5 o'clock. And that's probably like 3 days a week. I'm able to do that. I can just shut things down at 5 o'clock. I make a nice meal for my wife and I. We have dinner together every night. I think that having a schedule, like doing things at a certain time every day is really, really helpful. Like I need that. I need that structure. I was teaching last year as well as managing multiple projects. Like Queen City is not the only project I'm working on. For the sake of time, I limited it to Queen City, but all of us are working on multiple projects at the same time. And that's really difficult to juggle. So it was really important for me to get a team of people that I trust and who can be my eyes and ears in a room when I can't be there.
Anyone has a question from the audience? Yes. You have to speak up really, 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 really loud.
I'll try my best. Thank you so much for coming and speaking. This is very inspiring. And for taking up space as women artists of color and helping other communities take up space. And I say that because I feel like public spaces can just sometimes feel very, and this word might be harsh too, but just gatekept by a lot of systems, and especially like punitive systems, like Miss Cheleovve was saying before, like graffiti's illegal, and the way that we talk about graffiti and street art can make it feel very, very like off limits. So I am curious how you all came into your practice at the beginning, navigating all of these systems that can, make it hard to take up space.
I just want to repeat just the question. She's curious about how they came into their practice, and also, I guess, getting comfortable with and navigating the systems that make it difficult to take up space. Did I capture? Yes. Okay, all right, good.
And I just do the work,
They give me the wall, and no one bothers me. I always get this question, right? What if woman artist? And what challenges have you had? I'm not aware of if there's something happening that's.
I think there are little microaggressions. We talked a little bit about the green room. What's wrong with you? Don't know how to operate a lift?
Or my favorite is, I didn't know women did this.
Yeah. There are definitely microaggressions like that.
So all the men know how to operate the lifts? I don't think that happens.
Yeah, right, exactly. They're just born knowing. It's a built-in.
At least not with heels.
No.
Which I've had to do one time. I think early on in my career, I would get who are you assisting? And it was always great when my assistant, who was a male assistant, would go, no, she's the boss. She's the boss, right? I also come from badass women, right? So my grandma, who was a woman of color from the Caribbean coast of Colombia, 1940s, said they didn't want to get married because she didn't want a man telling her what to do, raised 6 children on her own. She was fierce. Still fierce. Her spirit's still with us, right? And my mom is the same way. I grew up watching my mom put down floors or help my dad clean office floors, or there was never this thought of women could not do certain things, right? I don't cook as well as my mother, but that's one thing that she's got on me. But it's one of those things where I was glad to have just growing up, just parents, including a father who would just encourage me in that way. I think now as a woman, an adult woman, and having a young son watch me, see me do this work, it's important for me that he becomes an adult who understands there are no limits to what women can do, and setting that as an example. But yeah, there's been situations where first of all, budgets that are much lower than male counterparts, being highly, and then I think this is in all fields, overly experienced, right? I had a situation where at the time I was doing a mural, I had already 15 murals under my belt, and then the person who was supposed to be my equal only had 3. And this was his first scale mural. And unfortunately, the way the media presented it was they were giving him the spotlight versus me. And so it does come into moments where you wish that you didn't have to do this, but you have to speak up for yourself. You have to talk about how things are not right or unbalanced. And then you're perceived as being a difficult woman, right? And I feel that in our field, how important it is for us to advocate, because I'm thinking of the 17-year-old child or the young woman who wants to do this work. I don't want them to be in the same position as I am, right? Or face these microaggressions, but they're really large in the scale of when it comes to budget, when it comes to timing, when it comes to opportunities that open up. So yeah, I just feel sticking together, but then also just speaking up is part of my practice, and doing it in a way that's constructive too. Because I'm always thinking, yes, there's a problem, and these are the 3 solutions that I'm proposing right here, right? So it's being nuanced in doing that and processing your emotions, and then being like, what can we do to move forward from here?
Did you have another question? Yes.
Thank you so much. You all are just so impressive, and I'm so thankful. My name's Marissa, she, her, hers. I was wondering where you see your art evolving into in the coming years.
Where do you see your art evolving to in the coming years? Just repeating it for audio.
I'll jump in. So I'm very interested in, this story of Queen City. Like, there are Queen Cities all over the country, all over the world. So there are so many stories that have been buried, so many stories that have come to light recently. I really want to take this work kind of around the world, really. I mean, that's kind of where I see it going, unfortunately, Yeah.
Do you want to answer?
Honestly, I'm wide open, and I don't have a specific aim. I'm just open for what the universe has in store next. But I do want to add more components, getting involved more with grant writing and doing more with the project, adding more components, having more community involvement in the making of it, but also in activations with the community, because you're leaving this gift for them. So how can they use this in the best way? Not just like one, flat piece of artwork. Mm-hmm. That's what I'd like to do.
I'm trying to carve out more time just for experimenting. I wasn't able to show this on the presentation today, but I've done smaller scale projection mapping and mural painting plus installation pieces. And I'm really interested in how projection mapping can really transform a space and bring past histories or imagery, text into space. So it's one of the things that I'm really exploring. And right now I'm working on, as I mentioned, the Our Market project, which I feel the same way as like there's many markets in the United States and abroad. But also, what does it mean to honor workers, land workers? What does it mean to claim space in the midst of gentrification? And I really loved our conversation here too, because gentrification is a main key issue in our public spaces, in our neighborhoods. And I feel that just seeing everyone's examples here of like, how are we utilizing our art not to support development and gentrification, but actually to root even deeper the stories of the community, to preserve or to present those stories in that way, or to reclaim stories that have been erased, displaced, ignored. And so with the market, and speaking to what you were saying earlier about grants, so like I'm working on a partnership. I recently got $1 million grant just to do this work for the next 2 years. I mean, I've done Familias Separadas. This is the largest grant that I've am processing, building a team, figuring out ways of like really deep impact. So it's public art, a digital archive, community-led tours. It's very involved, but it's this deep investment that I'm having that I want to do in my community. And I'm just trying to kind of document all of these strategies on how this could be helpful for other artists doing this work in their own communities and or similar situations of these markets or specific neighborhoods that are facing gentrification or are under-resourced on purpose by government officials and by the city. So that's what I'm kind of processing right now, but also it's scary and exciting at the same time.
Mm-hmm. We are going to be able to join our artists afterwards. We are going to have refreshments and a moment. So I hope that you all will take some time to be able to introduce yourselves and also introduce yourselves to each other. At these conversations, there are always amazing people that are here. So make sure that you meet somebody that you do not know. We have there was 2 questions, but I'm going to have to hold on 1 second for it. I'm going to take your question and then I wanted to hear where you guys are where we can find your work. Okay, go ahead.
Hi, thank you all so much. Like everyone's saying here, it's so inspiring. So my name is Nikki, she, her, ella, and I'm a 3rd grade teacher for DCPS. And I heard you saying, you were not the best student. I myself was not the best student. And I think a big reason for that was because I was always a different learner. And I realized in adulthood that because I didn't learn the way I was being taught, I was not getting the grades I should have been getting, the opportunities I should have been given. And I was really into the arts as a kid, and I didn't feel that it was fostered the way it could have been. So my question is, what advice would you give to your 3rd grade self? Because I have young students who are very different, diverse learners, and they have all these different skills, and I want to do my best to foster their way of learning. And so I'm just wondering if there's something I can take back from here into my classroom.
That's a beautiful question. It's really beautiful. I think that I was such a bad student. I mean, I wasn't terrible. I wasn't come on, guys. I wasn't flunking out of school or anything. But I always felt especially in history, I felt like I was just kind of hovering around on the outside, and not it didn't feel alive to me. I wasn't swimming within it. You know what I mean? And I think that the works that I'm making are a way to create that, to create the environment, the space where people can literally not literally, but figuratively swim within the history. So to my 3-year-old self or 3rd grade? Okay.
8 and 9 years old.
All right. 8 or 9 year old. I think that, I would tell myself to to follow my curiosity, to not have shame in what I'm curious about. I think shame is a big thing. To ask the hard questions. I mean, that's hard for an 8th. That's asking a lot for an 8th. 8-year-old. Yeah, that's asking a lot. But shame. I mean, I think we don't ask the right questions because we are ashamed. So yeah, just forget the shame. Yeah.
That's a really good question. Because I think, to not be afraid, it's going to be okay. There was a lot of anxiety when I was that age, just in terms of am I doing things right? In Julia Cameron's The Artist Way, there was this one part where they talk about who's the first person that shamed you when it came to your creativity. And for me, it was, I was asked to circle the right answer, and instead of making a circle, I made this tight little bubble around it. And I was called out in class, and it was brought me a lot of shame, but I was just being creative. And I think that was one of the stifling factors in my life that kind of just made me a little bit too self-aware when I shouldn't have been. But it's such a hard landscape, for these kids. So they're juggling so much. I really salute you for being there for them.
I have an 8-year-old. So, and he looks just like me. And as I think of, his name is Amado, which means beloved. And so one of the things that I try to encourage in him is that he can put anything, that he puts his mind to, that he can accomplish. He wants to be a scientist and a rapper, and he wants to do a lemonade stand and charge $10 for it. I was like, how much are you paying? So, but when you asked that question, I actually, I pictured myself at that age, frizzy hair, with my little hard glasses, and I had a patch on my eye because I have a lazy eye. And just being like, kids would tease me. They would call me Pirate Girl. So I would draw, use my superpower. I felt my art was my superpower, right? It was like, nobody else can do this. And, you know, my sister looked like Selena and I looked like a little stick and I had a patch in my eye and I was like, I'm going to draw this little, every day it was like a different message that I would put out into the world. And so even though you call me Pirate Girl and I was a nerd and my cousins from North Philly be like, oh my gosh, you read books? Like, I was like, no, I was very proud even within that structure of just trying my best to be myself, right? And I felt that, so I'm thinking of little Michelle and feeling like really proud of her, but also learning from my 8-year-old self to, you know, still feel like pride in where I am and the direction I've gone and have fun. Because that's another big thing, like play and have fun. But I think if I were to say something to her, and to my son, obviously, is you're not alone. And I feel that as educators, as people, like I try to show examples to my son of other people that have dealt with similar things or issues. He was just recently bullied at school, and I had to have a conversation with him. And he said to me, because you learn a lot from 8-year-olds, he says, oh, it's like, I said, well, you know, if you feel unsafe, come move yourself in this space. He goes, well, it's like chess. And I said, yes, that's exactly what it is. So thinking, like, I like to break things down, like, especially when he became aware of his skin color. He's his father's African-American from Pensacola, Florida, which is the South. And so we both work with our son in having him be aware of who he is and who he comes from. Like my phrases earlier in my presentation, like I remind him who he comes from, where he comes from. And so I think that, it's really important to present examples of people who have struggled and have still surpassed that struggle and have, shined, you know, and that's what I try to do with this my little one, who I love dearly.
I do hope that you all find these artists on any social media that you can. If you post anything to social media, please put #FreshTalkForChange, just so we can find you. I'm interested in see if you have anything to say. And also find them on social media. I think this is everyone's IG. Mm-hmm. Yes. And so if you want to find them on, mine is Melanin Douglas, but it's okay. You can find them. You don't have to find me. But thank you all so much. I really have wanted to have this conversation for quite some time. And I'm so glad that we could. And thank you all for coming out today to enjoy this. Please enjoy us and join us afterwards outside for happy hour and have some time together. So thank you. I hope you enjoyed today's conversation, and please follow our artists on their social media channels. Also, stay tuned and look for the National Museum of Women in the Arts. Sign up for our newsletters for women artists and social change programs. We have wonderful programs coming up in the fall, and we hope to see you there soon. Thank you for coming.
Hi there, I'm Jordan LaSalle. I'm the Vice President of Education at the Kennedy Center here in DC. I'm here at Fresh Talk, and it has just been such a delight to see the genuine and sincere offerings of these incredible artists, talking about how their work uplifts the culture and voices of the communities that exist in those places where they are working. And it is always so important to be inspired by that and remember that we have those connections and that it's our responsibility as artists and art makers to be quiet and allow for those creative voices to shine through.
Yes, so the speakers today were wonderful. It was so amazing to really get to hear about their experiences and the way that their lives and histories have influenced their work, and the way that their work then influences the communities and stories around them. Just getting to watch women of color be together in community with one another and then talk about their art is just so inspiring to me.
I'm Amelia Feliciano, and I'm at the Fresh Talks event. I have to say I was so inspired to, come to this event and hear from all the artists. I didn't know exactly what to expect, but I'm an artist myself, haven't been creating much art recently, and just seeing like how brave and centered and connected with their community all these artists were was a big inspiration. And not just in regards to like creating art, but just like in being a part of my city and connecting with it. So that was like my biggest takeaway from it, from the event.